Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Magical Rosary with Santa Muerte. I am a devotee of Santa Muerte. I'm Luna Eclipse. I've been dedicated to her going on for 4 years now, and I've been working with her for over 7 years at this point. I've been creating and teaching her rosary classes for over a year and a half, bringing the magic of the Bony One to those who may have never heard of her, building a conscious community of devotees. My focus is on helping others to incorporate her magic into their lives in a way that feels authentic to them while still honoring and respecting her native roots. Today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at some of these roots by exploring Santa Muerte's connection to the 7 African powers, and then we're going to be going deeper into the roots of the 7 African powers from an Ifa perspective. And we did try doing this last week, but we had some audio issues. I have new software, and I did not put the audio stream in properly. And I only realized that, unfortunately, after the fact. But it worked out okay. I knew that there was a reason for that, and because of things that have happened in the past week, there's a clear understanding now of why we had issues, and the Orishas wanted us to postpone this until this week. So welcome back, and I apologize for that, but we're going to be going even more in depth today. So I am here today with Iya Falana. She's an Ifa Priestess, and she's a good friend of mine who will be taking us deeper into a discussion on the 7 African powers. Iya is a wonderful priestess, a community leader, and a tarot reader, and she's also a big wealth of knowledge as well. We've worked together at several prestigious metaphysical and occult shops on the West Coast, and I'm honored to have her with us here today to share her wisdom and knowledge. Welcome, Iya.
Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate you being so open to having me to explain my spiritual path, the path of Ifa, to your audience at this time. Thank you so much.
Oh, we're so grateful to have you. Because I know it's going to segue into more things. Specifically, we talked a little bit about this last week too. The fact that with slavery, a lot of people were disconnected from their African roots. Just completely they weren't allowed to speak languages, cultures, completely lost. One of the things that we're able to survive is connection to the spirits of the ancestors through the 7 African powers, and that was one of the things that makes them so powerful and so unique and so specifically special to people of African descent, especially here in any of the Americas, but in the U.S. as well specifically. And how, one of the things, even if you're working if you're someone of African descent, if you're working with the Orishas, with the 7 African powers, it's a connection back to your power and back to your roots, and as such it is divinely sacred. If you want to talk a little bit about that, that would be wonderful.
Yes, I think that by people embracing the tradition of their ancestors, it does empower you. It does empower you. As I stated before, I think we talked about this last week, where I shared with you that I'm getting my African DNA ancestry testing, and I'm very excited. I'm very excited for the results. And so for people, particularly African Americans, or anyone in the African diaspora, to connect with their African traditional religions, traditional ways of life, is such an empowering thing to have, because when you go out into society, looking at where we are now, you really have, at times, if you are not balanced, you feel a sense of disempowerment, a sense of feeling invisible, a sense of not being seen and heard. And for you to have something that you can go to that makes you feel seen and heard and acknowledged, and that, embraces you for all of you, is empowering to people, you know, and this is really good for African Americans. I'm really glad to see a lot of African Americans returning to African-based religions. Now, don't get me wrong. You know, there's some people who are, you know, into church, you know, bless them. You know, that's the thing, you know, but I'm just, as a personal level, I'm really good. I'm glad to see that because of the history that Christianity has, what Christianity has done to the African American community through slavery. You know, religion was used as a weapon against us. You know, religion was as a tool to manipulate people. And it's still in a way today used as that way. Yeah. Particularly with African Americans. You know, you have some African Americans that will give their last $20 to their pastor. Right. You know, I love Pastor Johnson. I'll give my last $20 to him, you know, but they don't have food in their refrigerator. Right. But Pastor Johnson is living in a mega mansion, you know. Right. So that's how Christianity can be used as a weapon against, you know, people. And so I'm really glad to see a lot of African Americans returning to traditional African religions because it is empowering, not just, you know, for, you know, getting material things, but just having a sense of validation, you know, having seeing deities that look like you, right? You know, that have brown skin like you know. Which one Jesus thing that I had to, when I first started working with the 7 African powers, I had a hard time dealing with the white face. I'm like, okay, I understand the intention behind it, but I really, really am upset that I couldn't get to the Botanica in time, you know, to get the candle that I wanted. So I got to sit here and work with this particular candle. Right. And it was really hard for me to get behind that. But I had to because I needed a certain situation resolved. And I had to just call upon that energy like, look, I understand that you have this white face, but I know behind that white face is an African deity. And I need to bring forth that African deity to help me in the situation. Right. And it's good to see. I have, you know, statues of, you know, deities in my home that are, you know, African. And it's just good to, you know, walk over to the altar and see somebody that has brown skin just like you. Right. You know, that has brown eyes just like you and kinky hair just like you. It's very good to see that. And it just kind of affirms you. And I think it's good to have a sense of affirmation and belonging, given the fact of where we are in the society where, you know, to some people, Black lives do not matter. They really don't. And so we have to have a safe place, whether it's religion or, you know, in our communities where it's okay to be you. Right. And to reclaim. I would assume a lot of people through this path, there's a lot of potential for reclamation because, like you were saying, and I hadn't really considered that, but it makes a lot of sense. Of course, when you work with a candle that's a white saint, it's whitewashing your deity, whether that connection has been made 300-400 years ago or now, it doesn't matter. It's still the same thing. And there has to be a sort of reclamation of that. Right. In order for even just all the erasure, it's not even whitewashing, but the erasure of culture and the erasure of the African heritage and the roots and everything. So I would assume that there's a huge ability to reclaim, and that can be incredibly healing for practitioners who are of African descent, or Black Americans as well. And that kind of brings me to an important question, and one that needs asking. A lot of people are drawn to the Orishas for many different reasons. A lot of people who are not of African descent. I know from myself that it's very important to respect things and learn from the roots. But I would love to hear the perspective, the Ifa perspective,
etc., about white people, or even just people who are not of African descent, working with the orishas and how to approach that not just respectfully but properly. It's more than just respect.
Okay.
It's like a sense of reverence and actual understanding.
Okay. First of all, before you embrace any tradition that is not, that of your ancestors, you have to understand the culture that you're coming into.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I would suggest to anyone is to understand the culture you are coming into. Understand the history behind it. Read on it. Just don't come one day and just to decide, okay, I'm going to be doing this now. Right. Read and understand the culture. Also understand that, you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of oppression. So you're dealing with people who have ancestral memory of oppression. Mm-hmm. So to have someone that does not look like them to come in can be a little bit unnerving for some people.
Right.
Because a lot of African Americans understand that when we are among ourselves, it is a sacred space. Mm-hmm. And to have someone that does not look like you is almost like your sacred space is invaded. And some people can embrace it, some people can't. Also, it is about your sacred intent. Mm-hmm. I know of practitioners in this tradition that are white, that are priests and priestesses, and that are devotees of the Orisha, and they are some of the most wonderful people, because I say that they're wonderful people because I understand their intent. I know them as people. I understand that they understand the culture that they're getting into.
Right.
They are able to look at, our culture and understand that, okay, I am an outsider coming in. I understand the history behind this culture. I understand the history behind African Americans. So they don't just pop in. It's a high level of respect.
Right.
So in regards to people that are, white, practicing this tradition, I have no problem with it personally. I know practitioners that are probably listening to this right now are totally in uproar, but it is about your sacred intention. It is about your sacred intention. With any tradition, you understand the culture of it. As I said before, so you can't just approach it and just say, I'm going to jump into it.
Right. Just double down on what you were saying for just a second, about the sacred nature, the sacred black space that is there. If anyone is trying to enter that sacred space, they need to be able to keep it sacred and safe for Black people. And I think that would be one of the most important things. And if that is, and part of that is also just being able to take a seat and just be quiet and listen and learn. But yeah, just wanted to double down on that. Please continue.
So, like any person that is new to any spiritual tradition, listen, learn, observe, before you just jump into it. And also understand that African Americans, people of the African diaspora, have a difficult time trusting people that do not look like them. And this is because of the history, and know that when you come into this tradition, if you choose to, you may not be embraced by everybody. Just kind of know that, because of the history. And I think that's so important to realize. It's really not anything, you have to understand, it's not anything personal. It's not.
Right.
It's what you represent. And it's not, it's really not, it's just the fact of, as an African American, you are, when you go out into the world, you're constantly bombarded with images that you are not valuable, you are not important, by people who don't look like you. And then to have a sacred space and for someone to come in to that sacred space that has been giving you those oppressive messages all week.
Right.
It's just like, it's just too much. For some Black people, it's too much. It's just like, okay, it's just way too much.
Right.
So,
And like it's interesting because I've told you before, and we had an interesting conversation on this. I believe very firmly that Black people, especially in America, but I would assume over the entirety of all of the Americas, have a sort of cultural PTSD. And that is directly because of white people. So if you are a white person getting into this, you got to understand that. We just talked about whitewashing, and you talked about basically as a person being whitewashed every day of your life. Or erased every day of your life. And that's literally what slavery was. It was a whitewashing and erasure. And so having to experience that on a personal, not just a cultural level, but even a personal level, and even still today, having a sacred space like that would be incredibly healing, like I was saying, and important for Black people, but bringing someone in who, it's very brave and noble, in my opinion, that people in the African diasporic traditions are open even to allowing people who are white to come in and practice with them. And that's a sort of sacred nobleness, in my opinion. Clearly, you guys are listening and worshiping the Orishas, and that's wonderful, and keeping everything alive, your roots alive and everything through the Orishas. But yeah, definitely, I understand completely that it would be unnerving and possibly even just straight triggering for some people to have to welcome someone who looks just like the daily oppressor into your spiritual life.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as someone, if someone who is not from this cultural path would like to start working with the 7 African powers and the Orishas, clearly, some sort of cultural awareness is important, in addition to learning about the culture, in addition to learning about the history of things. And some history has been, in certain parts of the U.S. anyway, has been rewritten in ways that's almost making it into a sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Stories that are not even based, like the myth of mythos, essentially. Myth of the Southern Belle, for example, is one that's legitimately brought up about out of the idea of we're better than you. And that's awful. And so, like, being able to look at places where this cultural mythos has been written into the culture, is definitely something that's necessary, in addition to all the ways that one would need to work with the Orisha. So I would assume there'd be a lot of needing to prove your intent in a certain way if you want to reach out and work with a group, like an Ifa, a group of practitioners, that you should be doing on your own if you work with the Orishas regardless. Is that a good way to put that?
Right. Right. So you should do the inner work before you go and meet with a group of people. You should really look at your sacred intent. You should look at your character. You should do a lot of inner work. It's almost like you don't go out the house without wearing shoes in winter. I know that's a bad example, but you have to put some effort into this inwardly in order to make this to work for you, in a good and honorable way.
And always be able to elevate, and I say this in the Santa Muerte community too, but always elevate Native voices, always elevate Black voices. You have to show
Right.
in your actions and prove that Black Lives Matter. And I don't know, that kind of brings us to a little bit about all the things that have been going on in this past week. So last week we tried recording. It didn't work, and there was a good reason for that. It was a great recording, too, if it would have stuck.
Yeah.
But that's not what the Orishas wanted. They clearly wanted all the events of this past week to unfold, the protests to happen, and so now there's been many cities been lit on fire for people who are coming back maybe several years. That's where we're at right now, where we've had protests, cities lit on fire, and in my opinion, rightfully so, if people aren't going to listen to when people are taking a knee. You can only do so much, but I'd love to hear your perspective on some of this with regards to the 7 African powers and their messages that we need to hear, or maybe they're messages that we are not hearing clearly.
Well, what I want to say right now is that I am going to do my best to express myself in the most articulate way. I'm invoking my ancestors, my spirit guides, everybody to help me to get through this section of the interview, because it's really, really traumatic and upsetting for me to even be talking about this in 2020.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to extend my condolences to everyone who has lost someone in the African American community to police brutality.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make any sense, it doesn't make any sense. Let me just say that for those of you who are looting, I understand your frustration. But as you get older, you have to learn how to think smart. And it is of my personal opinion that in order to effectively make change, you have to economically boycott these businesses, these governments, whoever is oppressing you, you economically boycott them. So you say, hey, let's say there's a specific city who has a history of, police brutality. You say, hey, you know what? We're not going to spend any money in this town until you change and do have really good police reform. They will get your message, trust me, because money talks. Right. So if you do things like that instead of looting, I think that will be more effective. But I do understand that people are frustrated. The image of watching someone die and the person killing them had no regard at all. This police officer did not, pause. He didn't reflect. He just did it, and he looked. I think the thing that did it for me as a African American woman, as a human being, is that he looked in the camera and almost smirked, like he got some type of joy from it.
Yeah.
And I think that was the most heartbreaking thing. I was just like, is this guy serious? And despite people begging him to, release him, let him go, he just got some type of joy from it. I think that was the cruelest thing I've ever seen one human being do to another, is to get joy out of taking their life, unnecessarily. Now, there are times where there have been situations where people have had to defend themselves and someone had to take another person's life. But this gentleman, Mr. Floyd, he was doing nothing to hurt this individual. Right. He was doing nothing to hurt this police officer. Nothing. In fact, he was in handcuffs. He couldn't have done anything. So for you to put him under your knee and add your weight to it, I think that was just, it was unbelievable. My personal opinion is that they should up the charges. It should be premeditated murder, and this is my argument as to why. They're in the training for police officers. They tell you, okay, these are some things you can do to subdue a person. These are some things you cannot do to subdue a person. The position that the police officer put George Floyd in is not acceptable.
Right.
It is not acceptable all over the world. Right. And I say that because prior to this interview, I watched several YouTube videos on like defense. And one of the guys who watched, he was a guy who trained military people. He trained police officers, and he was actually crying. He was like, "This is unacceptable." He was like, "We don't run training classes like this for people to use this to go out and kill people."
Right.
He was actually crying, and I was like, "Wow." So the position he used is not acceptable throughout law enforcement, period.
It's not.
Secondly, this police officer guy knew George Floyd from them working together. So for me, as a person, when I see my coworker, if it's been 20 years, 15 years, I'm going to ask them how they're doing. I'm going to see if they're okay. I'm not going to go after them and kill them. So I interpret this whole killing to be something personal.
Yeah.
It feels very personal. And also, there was news footage of the person that owned the club that they worked at together. And she said that, George Floyd was the sweetest person, and she had so much trouble out of the guy before he became a cop, the person that killed George Floyd. She was like, "I always had trouble out of that guy. He never, did anything right. I always had to pull him to the side. I never had any trouble with George. He was a wonderful employee." So based on my intuition, and I may be wrong, there was some type of personal something there that was personal.
And that goes back to the cultural PTSD, because this happens over and over and over again. The names are just different.
Right.
Yeah.
So it feels something personal. And another thing you have to realize is that, this man had a family. He has a 3-year-old daughter. He has a daughter that he will never, ever see grow up.
Yeah.
He won't see her. He won't be able to give her sweet 16 birthday party, see her graduate from high school. George Floyd would not be able to see his daughter get married.
She won't have her dad.
And think about all the other, victims, particularly Black victims of police brutality. Yeah. They will never, ever get to have those major life transitions that all of us, would like to experience. Getting married, having children, seeing their children graduate from high school and college, see their children, have grandchildren, those small things that people take for granted, I think needs to be examined as it relates to people of color, particularly Black people. I mean, we're human beings too.
Yeah.
We want to be able to go home to our children at the end of the day, sit down with them, have dinner. We want to be able to take them to the park and sit with them and read a book. Like those small things that you take for granted, we want to be able to do those things too.
Right. And there's a fear that won't happen.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. There's just a fear that won't happen if things continue, because you're talking a lot of this, like I was saying, it's a cultural trigger, because this constantly keeps happening. And if it's not literally police brutality, then it's brutality of the system itself that separates families and keeps the Black community in a state of constant terror, in a sense. And when we talked about this earlier, we were talking a little bit about how it's a lot like an abusive relationship, and those wounds cannot heal. There's no space for them to heal if the abusive relationship is still continuing.
Right. And I think a way to stop, this from happening is to look at what you are teaching your children. You have to teach children how to hate. So if anybody's listening who is on the other side of this, who thinks that I am just totally out of my mind, look at what you are teaching your children, okay? You have to teach children how to hate. These children grow up and they go out into the world and they destroy the world. So if you want things to get better, look at what you're teaching your children.
Right.
If you look at all three of these cases, with George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, the gentleman in Central Park in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Someone had to teach those individuals who committed those crimes that it was okay to harass Black people. It was okay to kill Black people. So we have to look at what went into their upbringing.
Right.
And we also have to look at what goes into the upbringing of future generations. You know, also we have to realize that some of the people that are committing these crimes, these hate crimes, are people that are older,
mm-hmm.
that are have not experienced integration, that have not experienced, working with people of color, particularly African Americans. So they have a very narrow view of the world.
That's an interesting point.
As opposed to myself and probably you, where we're younger, we probably went to integrated schools. We've had more interaction with other cultures. So it doesn't bother us as much to, go into a store owned by someone that is of a different race than us.
Oh, absolutely.
It doesn't really bother us.
I've noticed in our generation, it's more the... I've noticed for us, people in our generation, it's more the subversive racism that you come across that needs to be weeded out. The all lives matter racism, the I don't see race racism. Yeah, that needs to be weeded out because it completely whitewashes again all of the entire Black experience, the entire PTSD that's been happening for generations, the wounds that are still there and fresh. It whitewashes the fact that there's an abusive relationship going on.
Right, and it does. I agree with you. The racism, that I have experienced as a middle-aged, because I'm 43, African American, particularly in the Northwest, has been very subversive, very subdued. I also grew up in Louisiana, and I've experienced racism in Louisiana. It's really direct and in your face. We don't like you. Okay, I got it. Here in the Northwest, it's very subdued, and for people in our generation, it's very subtle.
Yeah.
And so we still have to look at changing that dynamic, not saying things like all lives matter. That kind of whitewashes everything. It makes me feel like when I hear that, it makes me feel like you don't give a damn about my life.
Right.
You don't give a damn of how I exist,
Right.
And that hurts more than anything because it erases my existence. And I really don't appreciate that. I don't think Black people appreciate that, just being erased from existence by saying, well, all lives matter.
And it does it in a way that tries to shame. Yeah. And that's the other problem. It does it in a way that's like, well, you don't care about anyone else. And no, of course you do. That's not even the point. Right. So yeah, it's a type of erasure that uses some sort of moral coding in a negative way, and that's also, and something else you said to me earlier today when we were getting set up too was also really important. Again, it touches on a lot of these cultural wounds about people getting upset about the way that people are protesting or about looting. But no one cared about people being looted themselves, about Black bodies being looted, about Black people or the Black community being vandalized or terrorized. But instead, we care when we terrorize the Nordstrom and the bag, the $200 bag.
Yeah. So as I watched the media coverage last night, I was so upset that the media was more concerned about the fancy stores in downtown Seattle than human life.
Right.
You never put a price on a human life. You can replace that $500 bag. You cannot replace George Floyd. You cannot replace Breonna Taylor. You cannot replace Ahmaud Arbery. You cannot replace Trayvon Martin. You cannot replace Sandra Bland. You can't. These people are irreplaceable. Okay, they were unique expressions of the divine. You cannot replace them. Right. So what was so unnerving for me was that the press was more concerned about material possession than human life.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest with you, those corporations and those stores, they have so much money. They have money, I swear to you, and I'm not a financial expert, but I know somewhere, somehow, they have money to build those stores back up, whether it be in a special reserve, a special savings account. They can build those stores back up and build those stores up fairly quickly.
Absolutely.
You cannot replace, these Black lives. You cannot replace Sandra Bland and, Philando Castile and, you can't replace these people. You can replace that $500 bag.
Right. And what's
you can easily click online and order it, and it's in your store.
Right. And what's not being addressed is all of the, and I mean, I'm an empath, and we were talking about this earlier too. When I go to these protests, and I've seen it for the past several years, I've attended several Black Lives Matter protests, and every time I can't stay for very long because I will start breaking down, because I get tapped into that. Underneath it all, there's so much collective sorrow that has been saved up for so long, and it's pain, it's woundedness, it's again that collective triggering from the PTSD, these types of things. And I feel it immensely, and I don't want to detract from what's going on. So I end up having to leave because I'll just cry and it shouldn't be about that. I'm curious what healing needs to happen, but it needs to happen on Black terms and in the way that's best for Black people as people who want to work with the Orishas and the 7 African powers. I would hope everyone listening to this is an ally. And if not, after we just did all that discussion, I hope you're an ally now. What, from the Black perspective, from the Orishas' perspective, from any messages they may have, what is needed from an ally and what is needed for healing? How can we help affect the positive change and healing needed?
Well, the first thing for me that comes to mind is to acknowledge our humanness. Yeah. As an African American, I'm human just like you. I want to be able to go outside and exercise. I want to be able to, go to the store. I want to be able to sleep in my own home, just to acknowledge the humanity. Also to acknowledge the history and the privilege that as a white person you are given. And to understand that as an African American, there are certain things in this country I cannot do safely without losing my life. And you have to really understand that. Also, we also have to look at the economic impact.
Redlining.
How economics have affected African Americans.
Yep.
As I stated before,
Black Wall Street.
When we were talking, setting up to this, for 400 years, we were someone's property. Okay, so you had generation after generation after generation after generation born into slavery being someone's property.
Yeah.
We did not have the means to acquire, for a lot of us, quite a few of us did not have the means to acquire generational wealth. Okay, so we come out of slavery. We have periods of Reconstruction. A lot of us were still not able to acquire generational wealth. Okay, so you fast forward to today, you have a lot of African Americans in poverty, a lot of African Americans, with poor health.
Right.
And this is from not having economic opportunities to advance yourself. Right. And here's a primary example. A lot of African Americans live in what we call food deserts. So their closest grocery store is, the quick stop where, you have ramen noodles, you have potato chips, you have, candy as your meal.
Right.
So let's say a mother can only afford to go to that, Stop and Shop. She takes her kid to the doctor. The doctor's like, well, why is your kid sick? You're not a good mother. this woman is like, I'm doing my best. I don't have access to fresh food. She may not work at a job where she is able to afford a car to, get to that grocery store across town, or she's not able to, go into a grocery store if she's lives near a grocery store and buy healthy food.
Right.
So that's an example of the economic impact as it affects your health. And another thing that bothers me is when I hear white people say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You have to once again realize that we were in slavery for 400 years. I was looking at a black economist on YouTube, and he stated that it would take almost 200 years for black people to catch up economically to white people because we didn't have that generational wealth. So for a white person to say, oh, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, we can't.
Right.
Because a lot of us don't have that generational wealth. But there are a few of us that are, becoming a lot of us are becoming financially savvy. We have, people that are learning about stocks and bonds and investing and, things like that. But that really gets under my skin when someone says, just pull yourself out by your bootstraps.
Right. Who's going to give you bootstraps? Right.
That's some phony. I was about to say a bad word. That's some phony.
Right. Right. You have to have bootstraps to pull yourself up by. And that's not even how the world works. And as a person, I personally have PTSD, which is why I keep saying I liken what's going on to a cultural PTSD. Because for me, it's like the meta version, as I see it, it's more the meta version of what I've gone through in my own life. And I know that just the simple things, like someone being able to walk you through how to get the right resources, for example, can mean it's simple. It's really not that hard. And some people don't even get that with people with PTSD, but just a simple thing like that can help so much.
Right.
Like we were saying earlier, having someone just to give you that ride to the store when you're living it's going to take maybe half an hour out of someone's day. But as an ally, if you do that, that can make a huge difference in that person getting good food and being able to take care of their family in a way that's healthy and feels good to them and feels empowering to them versus not being able to do so, or being able to help the local Black community in your area, for example, find resources to things and being able to have a safe space for them to come and say what they need and know that their needs are going to be met. That even just in and of itself could be such a huge difference. It really is the little things that help someone to feel just a little more safe. Right. And
we were talking about this prior to the interview, how there were a group of white, Caucasian women in Seattle who were like, we want to serve as allies to women of color. And they asked various women of color, what do they need? Some people were like, I need a ride to the store. Some people were like, I need somebody to review my resume because I'm trying to get a job. Like little small things like that, I think can serve as, what white people can do to serve as allies for us, to give us those, opportunities to get those things that we, need.
Right.
And to understand that we are human beings just like you. I think that's so, I can't really stress that enough because, for you not to see someone's personhood based on what they look like, I think it's so unbelievable to me. And I guess that's also because of my upbringing. I was raised to not necessarily always look at people's skin color. I was able to look at their character. And please understand, I totally understand racism. It exists.
Right.
Growing up in the South, I was called the N-word so many times that I care to recall. But my parents taught me to look at someone's character, not looking at what they look like, looking at their humanity. Like this person, bleeds red blood just like you do.
Right.
And you also have to understand a deeper level that when you are in need, the way the world is in need right now, we need each other. You can't and the way the world is changing so much with this pandemic, you can't be racist. It's not in your best interest to be racist. It's really not. Because when let's say, God forbid, you catch what this pandemic is doing. When you go to the doctor, you may be seen by a black nurse. You can't be racist against that black nurse. Okay. Right. When you, let's say you get, God forbid, you get, admitted to the hospital. You can't be racist against that, Asian orderly that's, helping you to try to get better. You can't be racist against that, Latinx individual that's helping you, to get better. Right. You cannot afford to be racist in this pandemic. You cannot afford to. Another thing I want to mention is that all of us on this planet have a common ancestor. Okay, billions and billions of years ago. Let me back up. I don't know if a lot of people have heard of the Leakey family. Well, the Leakey family discovered these bones, and they were able to trace these bones in Tanzania. That basically, the bones and the artifacts that they discovered are our ancestors. When I say our ancestors, the human race. So from this one set of artifacts, or bones that I believe they call it Lucy, every human being on the planet came from this woman, this black woman. So for you to say, Black lives don't matter, it matters because your DNA is a part of this one little black woman in Africa who she's basically the mother of civilization. So out of every human being that has ever been on this planet in the past, every human being that is on this planet right now, every human being that will be on this planet in the future, that is their mother. Yep. This little woman in Africa that lived thousands and hundreds and billions of years ago. They've also found artifacts and bones in East Africa and some in South Africa. So, Black people are really like the mothers and fathers of civilization. And so for every person that's on the planet, you have that African blood running through your veins. So for you to be racist, it's like you're hurting yourself. You're not thinking and acting and doing and being in your own best interest.
Absolutely. And, a lot of people, I will say that the idea that you were talking about how when people say things like all lives matter, a lot of people who say that are misled. And I'm just going to quickly deconstruct it for a second. What they are trying to do, and it's not being effective, because that actually is a white supremacist. The whole concept comes from white supremacists, so you're not being effective. But they're trying to say, we're all human. That's essentially what many, or I should say some at least, are trying to say. And what you should say instead is, I see that we are all human. I see you as human just like me, and I see your suffering caused by racism and what it's done. And I see that as completely wrong, and I'm going to step up and deconstruct this. I'm going to dismantle these systems of oppression with you and within myself. Right. And I don't know how to make that into a slogan besides Black Lives Matter. There's nothing else that you can...
When I first saw that, it was so it made me feel really unseen, okay. And it came out about the same time as the Black Lives Matter phrase.
It came out in retaliation against it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it just made me feel really kind of brushed over, oh, yeah, okay, yeah. And no one should ever feel brushed over and not seen. That's just not how healthy societies function.
Right.
It's just not healthy societies function when only some of the citizens are seen, but not everybody, because everybody in a civilized society has something to contribute.
Right.
So for you to brush aside one group of people and not acknowledge them and only acknowledge a certain section, it really does not hold a society together.
Right.
So in a way, it's it's good that this is happening right now, because we need to examine how and why are we just brushing these people aside. We have to go in as individuals and examine, okay, why do I think this person who looks different than me is less than me?
Or this group of people.
You have to figure out your personal bias. Like, figure out whatever your personal biases are.
Mm-hmm.
Figure that out. I mean, we're sitting in quarantine right now.
Right.
You don't have nothing else to do.
Right.
Figure out why you don't, like people of color. Figure that shit out. So I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to curse.
You're fine.
Figure that out. Yeah.
You're fine. No, I mean, like, and even with people who are, quote, not racist, we are all, when you see, a lot of times it's black men, but black people, and especially black men, being victims of the police, essentially, whether it's made out to be like it's their fault or not, whether it really is or not, it doesn't matter. That's all that is shown in the media. That's all that's seen. And so in the cultural mindset over the, I don't know, hundreds of years really, but we'll even just look at today, a lot of the cultural subconscious is then to have a bias towards black people, or against, I suppose, black people, whether you realize it or not. And a lot of people don't. So, I gave you this and I'll get a little personal here. Years ago, I was living in Seattle, and I was coming back home really late through a dangerous part of town, which you had to go through to get to light rail. There was a lot of there were a lot of homeless people, and by that I mean people who were on the streets who, the type of homeless people who are on something or need to be on medication and aren't. So it was Pioneer Square, and it was a dangerous area to be in alone at midnight. And I was just trying to get to light rail station, and I'm half a block away. I'm just stopped at a stoplight, getting ready to cross. And, until we're able to go. And I noticed two men out of the corner of my eye. And, just instinct, split-second reaction. There's a vague understanding. One's black, one's white. Culturally speaking, which one caught my amygdala, I guess you could say, before I was able to even formulate a reaction. And I look, and the black man standing next to me is in a suit. And he's just as uncomfortable to be standing next to me at this light, probably for the same reason. And I flash him a smile so he doesn't have to be concerned. And the white man happened to be out of his mind and not wearing anything on his feet and not wearing a shirt. So, and like leering at us. So, but that is something that is not by choice. That's something that is programmed in us by society. Our choice is how we choose to look at that and react to it and dismantle it within ourselves. If we are not willing to be brave and look at that and say, wow, that's a racist knee-jerk reaction. Where did that come from? And then dismantle it. If we're not willing to, do the work to make that black man on the corner feel a little more secure when he's around us, because we're liabilities to him at that point, then we're not going to heal at all. I would love to also hear, before we go, if the Orishas have anything to say about all of this, if there's any messages that they have that would be beneficial.
Not that I can channel right now, but I'm just speaking I don't know, I guess I am channeling right now. I don't know what that would you call it right now. But the energy that I'm getting is that we must practice love, but also have a sense of justice. This man and these people who killed George Floyd cannot get away with this. They can't. They just can't. You can't justify this and not have some sense of justice. I mean, this man's life was taken.
Right.
You can't just, do this, and I define love as wanting the best for someone. So if you truly care about humanity, you want the best for all of humanity, whether they are black, white, blue, green. You see yourself in that person. You see,
right.
Your divine counterpart in that person. And you want the best for them. You want to love them. You want the best for them. And so you, as someone who states that, I care for people, an act of love to me is not to disregard, a black person when they say to you, I need help.
Right.
Or to, get more upset that they're looting, a downtown store,
right.
than to acknowledge the fact of why they're doing it and to look at the circumstances that make someone to do something like that. So love is looking at a person, wanting the best for them and helping them to achieve that best.
And wanting to understand, I would say, too. And you make a good point about justice. I will add, there's no possible way for any sort of healing to occur without balance, especially in this specific situation, especially
right.
with all of the wounding that has happened. There has to be some sort of balance, some sort of justice, and it needs to happen all the time, not just once. It
right.
needs, yeah. I would absolutely agree. There's no way anything's going to really change or effectively change,
right.
even with allies, until appropriate balancing occurs, until black people aren't, more thrown in jail more, for the same crimes that white people would walk away for. Until
right.
there is an actual justice, a balanced and equal justice, there is literally no way that there will be healing. That is a very good point.
Right. Now, what I personally would like to see, and I'm not a lawyer, I don't play one on TV,
right?
But the least they can do is to charge the police officer with premeditated murder or first-degree murder, and his sentence be 46 years. 46 is the age of George, was the age of George Floyd. He was 46 years old. So this cop, is a year of his life for every year that George Floyd lived on this earth. That, to me, that's justice.
Right.
This guy has a baby.
A life for a life.
He had a child that is going to be fatherless now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure deep down, this cop knew that.
Yeah.
And just did it. He just could. And it was just so, I don't know if the word egregious is the word I want to use, but it was just so unbelievable. It was so unbelievable that, he would just do it and just not have any type of reaction or sorry or anything. I think that's what people are angry about.
Right.
Yeah.
And that it is continuing and there is no justice. Yeah, those are very, very good and valid points. And I also remember last week we touched a little bit about the Orishas and messages that they had specifically for the pandemic, and those were really good.
Right.
Do you feel you're able to channel those one more time?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, good. They were really needed.
Yeah. So on a personal level, I would like to extend my condolences to all the people that have lost relatives due to this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I would like to express my thankfulness to the Orisha, the ancestors, all good, true, and benevolent spirits for those who have survived this pandemic. We speak life, health, wealth, and prosperity upon you, that you continue to recover and that you are restored to health and wholeness. Yes. This thing is no joke. This past week, we reached 100,000 people. I don't know if you guys have Facebook. I'm sure most of you who are listening have Facebook. there was an article in which a lady, she held up the cover of the New York Times, and on the front were nothing but names of people who died, and their name came. They had their name, and they could only sum up this person's life with one sentence. So, if that doesn't motivate you to keep your behind at home, you don't want to be on the cover of the New York Times and your life be summed up with one sentence.
Right.
Okay? I know when I make my transition to the ancestral realm, I would like at least a nice 2-3 paragraph obituary. In fact, I've actually written my obituary. I took a shamanistic class with a Native American shaman, and she had us to write our own obituary.
Yep.
It was a deep thing. It made you think about your life and what you wanted to do, what you didn't want to do anymore. It made you more aware and present.
It's a good thing to do with Santa Muerte.
Deeper respect for the ancestral realm. So if I can only say one thing to people right now during this pandemic, if you don't want your obituary to be one line in the New York Times, then keep your behind at home. Only go out for like necessities, food, medicine.
Right.
Wear a mask. Make sure you social distance. This thing is no joke. 100,000 souls. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like, they were there were these things on Facebook that compared the deaths in this pandemic to how much you can fill up a certain stadium. So imagine just stadiums and stadiums and stadiums and stadiums.
Right.
Full of people who have died of coronavirus. Right. And for people and for people to harass other people for keeping themselves safe, like you snatch a mask off somebody's face.
Right.
Like, how dare you?
Right.
How dare you? And another thing that I would say to encourage people to wear masks was a YouTube video. I've been watching a lot of YouTube and Facebook, as you guys can tell. How there was a guy on YouTube who was a police officer in Mexico. And he was encouraging people to social distance and wear masks. And he said that when you wear a mask and you social distance, it's an act of love.
Yes.
I was like, wow, I never thought of it that way. I was like, wow, that is a loving act, because you're saying, I care about my fellow human being, but I also care about myself.
Yes.
I want to keep both of us healthy. And it's an act of love. And I would also like to say that in relationship to the 7 African powers and what's going on right now, there's a deity in Orisha that we call Baba Luaye. And the Yoruba pantheon, he's also known as Shopono. And in Catholicism, he is known as Saint Lazarus. And he is invoked to help with pandemics, such as what we're going through right now. He was also, invoked during the AIDS epidemic, and his particular mission in life is to teach people about having compassion for their fellow human beings.
Yeah.
And like I said last week, at this point in the game, compassion is more valuable than toilet paper. It really is. Compassion is more valuable than toilet paper. Everybody's running around trying to get toilet paper. Have some compassion for your fellow human being.
Agreed.
You don't, push an old lady when she's trying to get groceries. You don't, go and purposefully wipe your nose on an essential worker in a grocery store. Another thing that another thing I can leave with you is compassion is more valuable than toilet paper.
Yeah.
If you can't get toilet paper, I hope to God you do. At least have some compassion in your heart for your fellow man.
Yeah.
That's it.
Compassion is the currency we need right now. I remember last week you mentioned a specific Orisha to work with. That was the one that you just recently just mentioned a moment ago.
Right.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And I don't want to cut anything short. If there was anything else, I am all questioned out. Is there anything else that you feel that you want to talk about or address?
Yeah. So I would like to once again say thank you for allowing me this forum to speak about my spiritual path. African-based traditions are often, you have a lot of misinformation, you have a lot of, negativity surrounding it. And I'm so thankful that you're able to give me a forum to clear up any misconceptions about that.
Oh, absolutely.
I would also like to take this time to thank the people who initiated me on this path. So, Baba and Iya, if you are listening, this is Iya Falana. I'm in Seattle still. Thank you so much for setting my feet on this path. I deeply, deeply appreciate you. So thank you.
Aww.
And that's it. That's all we got today.
Before we go, I did have one other thing I wanted to do. This whole weekend, I have left a candle lit, and it's been burning bright as well. It was burning for people of color in oppressive systems, and also for our black brothers and sisters, our black brethren here in the United States right now, to help lend them support. So I will be showing, when I repost this video, I'll be showing the candle that's burning right next to me right now, and going a little bit more into detail on that. But for now, I encourage you to join your magic with mine. This candle that's burning bright right now, it's sending love and healing and protection, strength and comfort, reclamation and power to people of color in oppressive systems everywhere, but especially for our black brethren in the United States right now. We see you, we hear you, we stand with you, and we lend you our aid. Our Santa Muerte, who will come for us all, kind and gentle be your kiss, protect the vulnerable, free the oppressed, heal the pain of the wounded, and shower the world with the cleansing power of your love. All right, well, thank you so much, Iya, for your perspective. I really hope that this information can help everyone's practices with the Orishas and the 7 African powers, if they choose to work with them alongside Santa Muerte, as some do. And I hope it also strengthens everyone's understanding of Santa Muerte color magic. And I also hope that this was a wonderful talk. I really appreciate you being open and willing to come and share not just the Ifa perspective at this point, which was what this was all about, but also the Black perspective, so that people can understand better, so that we can help facilitate actual healing and actual change. It was an absolute honor and privilege to have you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so be aware, everyone, we will have more events and videos coming up. I also have several videos in the upload queue, and we will be welcoming Roman back soon for more watch parties on our Facebook group. I also have meditative rosaries that are going to be coming out soon. My patrons get them first, and then everyone else will get them here on the YouTube channel. So I will be starting a monthly to weekly scheduled live rosary practice as well. I think it'll start monthly here on YouTube and on Patreon. Depending on the level, it would be monthly or weekly. So please support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel. Feel free to share our videos widely as well. We now have a Patreon, like I was saying, as well under Santa Muerte and the Magickal Rosary, to keep everyone involved and engage with Santa Muerte and to go even deeper into our magical practices. And feel free to see links below the video to stay involved and to remain engaged. Thank you so much for everyone being with us here today, and may Santa Muerte guide, bless, and protect you all always.